What is going on, world? What's up, YouTube? It's Zero here. Today I'm bringing us a brand new episode of the 8 Below Show. Welcome everyone to 8 Below. Thanks for being here, guys, to the best gaming related show here on YouTube. And I'm super excited about our episode here today. We have a lot of stuff to talk about, so let's get into it. We've talked about the Metal Gear franchise in the past, and I wanted to talk about the future of this franchise, if there is a future, and talk about where is Metal Gear Solid 6 at this point, because this is a game that a lot of us have been anticipating for quite some time, and there might be a little glimmer of hope there. So let's talk about it. Guys, the last Metal Gear game we had in the franchise was Metal Gear Survive in 2018, and the last game within the main franchise of Metal Gear was Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, which was in 2015. Now, here's the thing, guys. This is a game and a franchise, I believe, that has a lot of life left in it, but it needs to be put into the right hands. I think we can all agree that Metal Gear Survive was a significant downturn for the franchise, unfortunately. But in order for us to really see if this is even a possibility, I think we have to look at the creator of this franchise being Hideo Kojima. What is he doing at this very moment? And obviously coming off of Death Stranding, he's now apparently going to be working with Konami on another IP, that being Silent Hill, and he's going to be able to finally finish Silent Hills according to rumors and leaks. Question is, though, the other Konami IP that, of course, Hideo Kojima founded was none other than Metal Gear, and I think it might be a possibility after Silent Hills or maybe after Death Stranding 2, we very well might be able to see a Metal Gear game made in the foreseeable future. And an article that was written by Melindy Hetfeld of Games Radar, if Metal Gear Solid 6 is to happen, even as a remake of 1987's 2D Metal Gear, it needs to build on Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. For 5 years, the prospect of Metal Gear Solid 6 has looked increasingly unlikely with the Metal Gear Solid franchise put on ice. Hideo Kojima, creator and main driving force behind the series, is now successfully helming the independent development studio Kojima Productions, its first game, Death Stranding, having done well with critics and fans alike. But while Kojima is doing well and potentially eyeing a return to the abandoned Silent Hills project next, any news about his work on the state of things at Konami leads us back to wondering about the future of Kojima's most iconic franchise and the possibility of Metal Gear Solid 6. So, the release date, it still might be a ways off, I think, and that's something that we should all probably understand at this point, guys. If this is a game that's going to come out, it's probably pretty far out. Prior to the release of Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain in September of 2015, publisher Konami announced news of internal restructuring efforts. At that time, the Kojima Productions logo disappeared from the official Konami website, and all promotional material for Metal Gear Solid 5, with Kojima leaving the company not long after the game's release. The only details of this dispute available to the public are an inside report published by GameSpot and a report by Nikkei Asian Review, which notes that according to former employees, Konami barred ex-Metal Gear team members from using their experience with Konami on their CVs. Metal Gear Solid 6, should it come to pass, is likely to be led by Konami, but as things stand, there's currently no info when or even if the company plans to return to the franchise. Look, I believe that Konami, guys, definitely wants to do another Metal Gear, and I think that the way that they're looking at it is that they're open to kind of patching up this relationship with Kojima. Obviously, if anything, if this is true, that Kojima is back to work on Silent Hills, one of Konami's, big IPs, obviously, Sony is kind of mending this relationship between Kojima and Konami, and if that is the case, I think Konami will be open to another Metal Gear game. I'm pretty sure, though, they're going to want Kojima kind of helming it once again, because it's going to be steering it back in the right direction. It's going to show goodwill as to, look, we patched up this relationship. Kojima has a massive following, and it's going to help Konami in the long run. The question really comes down to Kojima, and the ball is in his court at this point. If he wants to do Silent Hills, if the experience is good, I think he'll definitely, potentially, return back to Metal Gear after maybe a Death Stranding 2. We're likely never going to find out what Kojima had planned for the Metal Gear series, if indeed he had more plans at all, having repeatedly stated his desire to leave the series. In fact, Kojima stepped aside from Metal Gear Solid 4 only to take the helm when he became dissatisfied with progress on the project. Luckily, Metal Gear Solid 5 is an excellent game which could provide a lot of the groundwork for Metal Gear Solid 6, should a chronological sequel be pursued. These are the suggestions. So, number one though, guys, really quick before we get into this, is that Kojima obviously was kind of at a point where he just didn't want to work on this series anymore. And I totally understand it, because after you work on something so much and you've made so many games in it, you kind of want to move on to other pastures. And that would be my number one biggest red flag about another Metal Gear game being made by Kojima, is because he's been there, done that. He wants to work on other stuff. Silent Hills he hasn't done, and Death Stranding he wants to continue because this is kind of like a baby to him. So Metal Gear Solid 5's open world setting was certainly one of the most novel changes for the Metal Gear franchise. It's absolutely massive, but the scale isn't a problem in itself. Missions in Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain can feel like busy work, especially since the second half. You have to repeat a lot of what you have already done in order to move ahead with the plot. If you're just out to scrap fault-ton balloons to stuff and find increasingly creative ways to dispatch your enemies with your massive arsenal, that's fine, but Metal Gear is usually so focused on delivering its story that the type of open world missions you are required to do in MGS5 simply don't really fit the story. So that's kind of like the first part. I agree partially with that. Metal Gear Solid 5's non-ending was much discussed and possibly a victim of mounting tensions during the development of the game. However, there's a compelling argument that MGS5 was meant to feel unfinished, mirroring the game's themes of identity and the phantom pain of unresolvable trauma. Now that we know what happened to Big Boss, or rather the Big Boss of MGS5, his story still remains untold, at least in a game. For all the possible scenarios Metal Gear 6 could explore, there's an opportunity to bridge the gap between the phantom pain and the first Metal Gear, which I think is true. I would love to see that happen. I think there's something about the endings, guys, that definitely, obviously there's a continuation. It's almost like Kojima likes doing that. He likes keeping things open-ended, a lot of psychological mystery to his games. But I would agree that they should continue the story from Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, in my opinion as well. Now, remaking the original Metal Gear, if Konami wants to play it safe and leave the series untouched, as the disconnect of Metal Gear Survive from any Metal Gear plot suggests, it could work with what's already there. Metal Gear, not to be confused with Metal Gear Solid, on PS1 is an amazing game plot-wise and vital to understanding the story of Solid Snake. It's also a game from 1987, a Metal Gear remake using the Fox engine on next-gen consoles will not only be a dream come true for current fans, but also provide new players with a perfect entry point. I agree with this. They definitely should do some remakes of Metal Gear, in my personal opinion. Kind of for people who haven't, because it is a game that's kind of spanned a long period of time here, right? Going way back to when gaming was kind of first starting, essentially. And, so I think it would be good for people, even myself. I mean, I never played those really, really old Metal Gear games. That'd be awesome to have those as a remake. With all the systems that do exist in MGS5, asking for even more seems slightly decadent, but we'd love to see the return of the Outer Ops feature from MGS, Peace Walker, which is the PSP game from 2010. Outer Ops are bonus missions that you can assign to NPCs to acquire resources, and these were missing in MGS5. I agree. I think that would be something that's cool. It's not like I don't have a huge opinion on that, but I would say that would be something that would be pretty cool. This is a big one for me, though, is MGS5 led to two online spin-offs, Metal Gear Online and the Forward Operating Base Mode. Metal Gear Online was an interesting game that never gained the attention it might have deserved, especially the Cloak and Dagger mode that fits the essence of the game exactly. The Forward Operating Bases, not so much. Due to a skewed risk-reward system, players will either not bother invading or will be left to their own devices by the base owner, neither resulting in the one-on-one battles FOBs are supposed to facilitate. We think no one would miss the FOB system much. That time would likely be better invested in additional multiplayer maps and classes. So I agree. I would love to see a return of Metal Gear Online. In like a Metal Gear Solid 6. I would like to have Metal Gear Online as like obviously like a part of the package that you would get. And I think that there was something special there. I think that it was something that was almost untapped, or it deserved to be much bigger than it actually was. And that's really my personal opinion on it. But the true sore point is, of course, the story. And the fact that it is, in this aspect, Hideo Kojima is nigh on irreplaceable. Even a Metal Gear remake would have to flesh the plot out to make a game worthy of today's standards, so someone will confidently have to take up the mantle and not try to shy away from Kojima's legacy like Metal Gear Survive did. So we'll have to kind of wait and see what happens. But here's the thing, guys. I think at this point, this is a game, Metal Gear Solid 6, is in a limbo state at this point. But I don't think, guys, that it's a game that won't ever happen. I think that it definitely could, especially with Kojima and Konami kind of mending this torn relationship and partnership together. I think them bringing that together, bringing it back, and Sony kind of there, that's kind of like overseeing all of this, could be really good for the future of of the franchise. Now, is it something that's going to happen? It's hard to say, guys. I mean, it's really hard to say whether or not this is something that is going to ultimately, if it's something that's going to ultimately come to fruition. However, if it were to, I would love to see Kojima do it one last go around, even though I have my doubts about that. But I think all in all, even if you say that Metal Gear is done at this point, having some remakes I think would be really good. Do those well, and I think that would be something that would be really special that we could all look forward to, even if they left this franchise kind of alone for the rest of time. It's hard to say. I'd love to see Kojima come back to it, but I would understand why he wouldn't want to, because, he's worked on it for so long, and he wants to work on other projects, that being like, of course, Silent Hills, as well as maybe even a continuation of the Death Stranding universe, which is what I think is probably where his mind is at this point. But let me know what you guys think. Where do you guys think Metal Gear Solid 6 is at this point? Do you think it's in a limbo state? Do you think it's something that's already been, that is already in the early stages of development? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. And for more Metal Gear Solid 6 content and videos, stay here with Zero TV. I've always had a passion for Western-based games because they're not something that are super, abundant in the gaming landscape. When you think of games that are, Westerns that are really popular, you think of really Red Dead Redemption or just Red Dead Revolver in general, the Red Dead franchise as a whole. But one of those other franchises, guys, that I think got not as much attention as Red Dead was Call of Juarez, which, guys, in my opinion, this was a pretty exciting game, and it spanned from 2006 all the way to 2013, and I think that this is a franchise that deserves to coexist with other Westerns out there in the gaming world. So let's talk about what happened to Call of Juarez, and as I said, guys, this series started in 2006, and it seemed like as the games went, there were, the reviews and things of that nature were, they were pretty good at first. And to be quite honest, I mean, we had a decent amount of not only good reviews and reception, but even the sales for this franchise were pretty good as well. You start off with the first game that, of course, came out for Call of Juarez in 2006. And honestly, guys, when you look at the reception of these games, they were pretty good, sales-wise as well. So you had 8 out of 10 from Eurogamer, you had GameSpot 7 out of 10, from IGN 6.8 out of 10, 7.5 on Xbox 360, so pretty good reception overall. The sales, the game did not sell well in North America. According to the MPD group, it sold only 137,000 units across both PC and Xbox 360. However, its European sales were considerably better, with Techland crediting the game as putting them on the map as a globally recognized developer. Overall, the game sold well enough that Techland and Ubisoft established a Call of Juarez franchise. So obviously, it kind of kickstarted it, right? The very first game, I mean, it wasn't like super popular, but it was pretty good, probably from good reception and just, good reviews and such, and then pretty good sales, right, for a very first game, even though it didn't sell extremely well in North America. Look, then it kind of started this franchise, and we went to Call of Juarez Bound in Blood, which was the second game in this franchise, and I thought this is where it really got its footing. This is the first one out of the franchise I really kind of got into, was Call of Juarez Bound in Blood. And I thought that this got it got really good reception in my personal opinion. It got generally favorable reviews. I mean, you look on the board, guys, you have IGN giving it 7.7 out of 10. Eurogamer 7 out of 10, GameSpot 8 out of 10. So pretty good, pretty good reviews. Ultimately, the sales for Bound in Blood was a commercial success, selling considerably more units than the original Call of Juarez, according to figures from the MPD Group. In its first 4 days of North American release, the game sold 24,000 units on Xbox 360 and 20,000 units on the PlayStation 3. In the United Kingdom, it entered the charts at number 6, but rose the following month to number 4. The game ultimately sold roughly 1 million units worldwide across all systems, making it one of Ubisoft's best-selling titles for the first half of the fiscal year. Although their overall sales were down 52% from 2008, having earned $247 million by November compared to $511 million of the previous year, they cited the strong sales of Bound in Blood and Anno 1404 as high points. So Bound in Blood, guys, this was kind of like that one of those games where it just felt like things were going pretty good at this point. I mean, obviously this was I would say that the incline was at full swing with Bound in Blood. Then came Call of Juarez, the Cartel, which I think we can probably all agree that this was probably the lowest point of the franchise, and there was a big question mark whether they were even going to make another one after Call of Juarez the Cartel, because this one had generally mixed to negative reviews, guys, from game rankings and Metacritic. Metacritic gave it 51 out of 100 for PC, 47 out of 100 on 360, and on the PS3 a 45 out of 100. That is not good at all. Those are pretty negative reviews, guys. The game has also been accused of racism and insensitivity toward real-life events, addressing issues such as human trafficking and the current drug wars in Mexico with flippant inaccuracy, particularly their having swapped the victims of such trafficking from being Mexican women shipped to the U.S. to U.S. citizens being abducted to Mexico. James Portnow of Extra Credits has criticized a level in which the player is awarded an achievement for killing 40 or more enemies on the only level where there are African Americans and no enemies other than African Americans, adding this might be the most racist game I've ever played by a major publisher. And guys, this was the pitfall of this franchise, in my opinion. I don't know what they were thinking, and when I say they, guys, I mean, really Techland, when they made this game. I thought that underneath everything, all the controversies and things of that nature, I thought that there was something special here with this game, but just the way they went about it was just wrong, in my opinion. And I thought that from such a significant incline with the Bound in Blood, this is where that fall happened. And look, guys, we always talk about this on the YouTube channel, that every franchise has, peaks and valleys. And this was certainly a valley, guys, that was going straight downhill. And then, of course, Gunslinger came out, guys. And this game came out in 2013, which so a couple years later, and I thought that this was kind of rewriting the ship, so to speak. I thought that the reception of this one was very good, was very positive reviews. I thought it was a really good game. It was probably my second favorite to Bound in Blood. Got pretty much 7s and 8s out of 10s, guys, across the board. And in my opinion, this was a very well put together game. Now, ultimately, guys, what happened to Call of Juarez? Well, I really think, guys, that Call of Juarez the Cartel is the game in which really hurt this franchise for the foreseeable future. Even with Call of Juarez Gunslinger coming out, I think that there was such a bad taste in so many people's mouths regarding that game previous to Gunslinger that people just didn't even buy Gunslinger, and I think it actually harmed the sales there as well. Ultimately, guys, the other thing was that Call of Juarez Gunslinger was a single-player only experience. The Cartel had multiplayer experiences, and look, they kind of went back and forth, right? But all in all, Call of Juarez not only had a single-player experience, it had a multiplayer experience. So there was more ways than one to connect with the franchise, and Gunslinger only had a single-player experience, which I think a lot of people didn't like. I think people wanted to be able to play multiplayer because a first-person Western shooter, guys, that's not something that's been, really, really popular in today's gaming. And so this was a game I think that definitely deserves to coexist within gaming as a whole. But I think that the backlash of the Cartel is really what hurt this franchise moving forward. Now, will we ever see Call of Juarez, a continuation of this franchise. I do think it's very possible. Now, when we look at kind of the ins and outs of everything, guys, there is a lot of question marks around this franchise. Does Ubisoft want to make a chance on it, or Techland, do they want to continue making these games? There's a lot of, big time question marks here, but when discussing Call of Juarez, guys, I'm going to be kind of reading from an article, pieces of an article written by Ethan Butterfield of GameGrin. Now, he wrote this a while back, guys, but I think it's still pretty relevant. Now, when discussing Call of Juarez, an interesting thing to point out about this franchise is the amount of praise it had before vanishing. Usually, a series has a couple of bad apples before kicking the bucket, but Call of Juarez is different in that regard. The last entry to the franchise, Call of Juarez Gunslinger, was seen by fans and critics as being overall well-made and a welcome addition to the series. With that being said, let's go through a bit of gaming history to see where things went astray. Kind of went through all of that, guys. Went through the prequels. We went through, of course, all of these games, like each game in particular. Now, one thing to mention is that Techland are the makers of Dead Island and Dying Light. So remember that, guys, that they are probably also working on other titles outside of Call of Juarez. So that's something that you also have to think about. Obviously, Dead Island's going to be a new addition to Dead Island, a new Dying Light. So you always have to kind of remember that these developers aren't only a lot of times working on just one IP. So that's another thing to really keep into consideration moving into, the future. Now, as far as where did things go wrong, take a shot in the dark. I'd like to think it was lack of interest overall. Call of Juarez has always been a popular franchise, but like Bulletstorm, popular things don't always sell. This is especially relevant due to the fact that Gunslinger couldn't garner a full box console release. Now, I've heard rumors that there is a new Call of Juarez waiting in the wings, but we'll have to wait and see if things pan out the way they do. So, look, I agree with that. I mean, Gunslinger, that was the thing. Not only is it only a single-player experience, it didn't even get a full-box console release, so that's another thing. So it just had a number of things that just went wrong, and even though it was very much so welcomed in the Call of Juarez franchise, but after the cartel, you had Gunslinger, which, of course, people really liked, but it just didn't, the marketing and such just really wasn't there like the other games. And on top of all of that, guys, Techland's working on other games as well. Will they ever return to Call of Juarez? I think they will, guys, especially on the next generation of consoles. I think there's a real opportunity and possibility to really right the ship in the right direction, even though I think Gunslinger kind of started that. Continue moving in that direction, in a positive direction, single player, multiplayer, and some co-op modes, and there you have it. I think you're going to have a really good Western first-person shooter on your hands. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below about what happened to Call of Juarez. Would you like to see a continuation in this franchise, or do you think it just needs to be laid to rest, so to speak? Let me know what you guys think, and for more Call of Juarez content and videos, stay here with Zero TV. I want to take this last segment of the show, guys, and talk about a franchise that I think is very iconic, and a franchise that I had felt for a long time that needed to continue, and it got a continuation, but in a different way than what I was expecting, and that being HalfLife, guys. HalfLife is a franchise that I have absolutely loved and have always wanted continuations of in the franchise. So let's talk about it. HalfLife, and what I would like to have happen in the foreseeable future is a Half-Life 3. And I want to talk about why I think that this is a game that should exist in gaming as a whole. Because look, you had the first two Half-Life games, which were, critically acclaimed by so many people. People absolutely love Half-Life, guys, and have been asking Valve for so long for continuations of that franchise, as well as like Left 4 Dead and a number of other IPs that Valve owns. Valve, guys, I have been very critical of Valve in the past about them not really caring about some of their IPs, or really even the IPs that make them generate them a ton of money in revenues. They just don't seem like one of those developers that really cares what the overall people as a whole, that being like the player base and the fans, really want out of their different franchises. But nonetheless, without going, I don't want to go on a rant on Valve here, but because here's the thing is that not all is negative with that company, obviously. They created Half-Life Alyx, which was a VR experience, which I've kind of stated in the past that it's, I'm very happy that they continued Half-Life. It was just in the way in which they did it. The fact that it's a VR experience and that's all it is, it looks like a game that's primed to be not just a VR experience, but also a PC experience and also even a console experience. So I've been a little bit critical of that as well, that I feel that Half-Life Alyx should have been also on consoles and PC. I think it would have sold incredibly well, and I don't know why Valve did that. They just, for whatever reason, they decided to make this game specific to VR. And obviously that's within their right, of course, as the developer and owner of the IP, to do whatever it is that they please with Half-Life. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think that even though I think Half-Life Alyx was an incredible experience, one of the best VR experiences there is, I just think that in order to continue building this franchise, a lot of people out there, you'd be surprised how many gamers haven't even played the first two Half-Life games because they came out quite, a while ago. And so I thought a continuation would be huge. So Half-Life Alyx is going to quench some people's thirst, because those of you who are huge Half-Life fans, you get to play the game if you have a VR headset. If you don't, you're out of luck at this point. A Half-Life 3 would not only continue the franchise, but it most likely wouldn't be on VR. VR, to me, guys, feels like a mobile game. It feels like something like, oh yeah, that's cool. Like VRs are very cool way in which you can connect with a franchise, but it kind of feels like a mobile game. It's not in the way from the standpoint of like literally, but in the way you think about how there was such backlash based around, Diablo Immortal or around Command & Conquer Rivals. Those were additions to those franchises, but they were not what people wanted. People wanted those, continuations of the main story and such, but within a PC version or within the console version, not just a mobile announcement. I think that Half-Life 3 and Half-Life Alyx can be kind of somewhat similar here. Half-Life Alyx, obviously, people had just been waiting for a long time for another continuation of the franchise, and I think there were a lot of people who were really upset that Half-Life Alyx was only a VR experience. And from just talking to people in the community and even myself, I was pretty bummed out to see that it was only going to be on VR, because I don't think that this was a title that was going to get everybody to buy a VR headset. It wasn't going to be the defining moment to really put VR on the map. I think that it's going to be a game that people are going to love to play if they have a VR headset, but if you don't, like I said, you're out of luck. And so Half-Life 3, guys, why it should exist is not only because this is going to quench everyone else's thirst who weren't really able to play Half-Life Alyx because they don't have a VR headset. It's also going to continue that story. It's going to be a direct continuation, most likely, of Half-Life 2. And we're going to continue building upon those graphics, the story on the next-gen consoles. And I think that Valve it would be very smart for them to do a Half-Life 3. As we've said, that it would be smart for them to do a Left 4 Dead 3. I just think, guys, that this is a franchise that needs to continue in more ways than just a mobile game, or in more ways than just a VR experience. And I've said that about, Diablo. I said that about Command & Conquer. These are franchises that deserve to be more than, continuations with a mobile game. Mobile games are fine. VR games are fine, guys. There's nothing wrong with them. But you want to have that as a way that you can connect with the franchise further, but you want main additions to the franchise that you can sit down and play, whether that be on a console or on a PC, and, really kind of just dive in consistently throughout the course of the game. And not saying that you can't do that with VR or a mobile game, but I think that there is definitely a difference in kind of that casual playthrough. There's a difference between, it's more, playing on your mobile phone, you can play it anywhere. Playing on VR, you got to stand up, you got to move around, generally speaking. This is more of a casual experience where you're really, you're fully engaged and you're able to kind of go at it at your own pace. That being said, though, I gotta say Half-Life Alyx was a real masterpiece in my mind as far as from a VR perspective. I think what Valve did was incredible. I really do. And I would love to see a continuation of that at some point in the future with VR, but I really want to see a continuation, guys. Half-Life 3 moving forward, continuing after the second one, having it on PC, on consoles, something that all of us, the rest of everybody else can actually connect to. And I think that's important, guys. So there's a number of reasons why I believe that this is not only just like one of those most iconic series, guys. I believe it definitely deserves to exist and have a continuation of, without a doubt. I mean, it's just that popular to gamers across the globe that I think Valve would be smart to do that. And this isn't just the only game that deserves to exist, guys. There's plenty others that deserve to exist. But what it really comes down to is the fan base. Those of you who are huge fans of Half-Life, telling Valve what you want, telling them that you want a Half-Life 3 and something that isn't, just a VR game or on mobile devices, something that you actually can play on PC and consoles as well, having more and more ways that you can connect with the franchise. I'm not knocking mobile games. I've said on many occasions, I really enjoy a lot of mobile games. It's another way that you can connect with the franchise. I love VR games. I've said that too. But I think with Half-Life, guys, of iconic franchise, we want it to not only just be a VR game, we want continued additions to the franchise in more traditional senses as well. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, and I would love to have a real conversation about this. You guys want to see a continuation of Half-Life in the form of Half-Life 3 on consoles and on PC as well? Let me know in the comment section below, and for more Half-Life 3 content and videos, stay here with Zero TV. And with that being said, everyone, I hope you guys did enjoy this episode of the 8 Below Show. And if you guys did, leave a thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, stay positive, and as always, I'll talk to you guys all in the next one. Peace.